Hello everybody, this is Bentguru. Most of you probably know who I am. Some of you might remember me from Dawn of War 2 and Company of Heroes. I did do a fair bit of shoutcasting back then as well. I haven't done it for Wargame European Escalation much because it's a fairly small audience and there didn't really seem to be much point of it. There's not a whole lot of overall strategy and tactics to it. In terms of an RTS, there aren't builds, there's no tiering structures, all that fun stuff. So I didn't much see the point until recently, where we've had, frankly, what is an insane amount of whining about rushes. In particular, every type of rush. But, there have been people banging on about spam and infantry rushes and how, a brain-dead player can easily destroy a more skilled player. And it takes a lot more skill to defend than it does to defeat, and, la-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So, I have decided to start posting some shoutcasts of videos that I think illustrate good and bad ways to defeat the spam, and hopefully teach or convince people that it's not as hard to beat as you might think. So for this first, we have a 2v2 that I was lucky enough to play in. This is a puppy game. I don't know any of these people, although I think the PACT players know each other, judging by the way they're set up here. As you can see, we have lots and lots of cheap PACT units. Lots of T-62s, with some of the obligatory mass cheap air cover and infantry and absolutely nothing else. Over on the NATO side, we have, you didn't see it, but Gersley was originally going for an extremely expensive helicopter all-in, which I told him not to do because it's stupid. And surprisingly, he listened to me there, which he didn't do for the entirety of the map after that. So I'm not entirely sure what he was going on about. Anyway, he manages to start this game with virtually nothing on the field, which doesn't help. And he will be fulfilling the role of the person who cannot react to rushes well. Meanwhile, I will be fulfilling my usual role. I'm just playing with builds here. I've actually dumped a shit ton of veterancy onto these Martyr VTS-1s, 2 more than I generally get. 1 more level of veterancy than I normally get for the Weasels. And the rest of it is pretty, oh yeah, Max Vet M1A1 Abrams. I actually delete this. I thought it would be funny to play with, but I deleted it because I was trying to play something more in line with what I would play as in a World Cup, Wargame Cup, WCG match, yeah. So, oh, by the way, points-wise, this is 2,000 per player, 40 minutes total destruction. So we've got a little bit of an extra points cushion, I would say. So what you see here is about 1,500 points worth of me, and I've got another, I think, 400 or so in reserve. So it's not, an excessive build for me, and I've got a lot of points in reserve to counter anything interesting, which this turns out to be. You shouldn't leave 400 points in reserve when you're playing. In fact, I would say anything more than 200 points is excessive. The reason I say that is twofold. First off, you shouldn't be relying on reactionary units you call in after you've made contact with the enemy, to cover the various types of all-in rushes you can see. You shouldn't need to call in units to counter ground rushes. You shouldn't need to counter units to counter helo rushes. Your initial force should be effective at countering both. And this is not as hard as some people say to do. In fact, I'll be posting a very short game eventually between me and Komorambi that we did a while ago, where I basically stress test my, what was my build at the time. It's pretty identical to this one, but I make small changes every match against Helicopter Rush. And anyway, I'll walk through that one easily. But with this initial force that I've got here, just the 3 Martyr Roland 2s, the Chap, and that's all my air cover, I can defend against a helo rush exceptionally well. And I can also turn this force into an offensive force very easily. Autocannons are the jacks of all trades, and like always, they are effective. So at this point, the first thing everyone should be doing is scouting aggressively. Because I scout aggressively, I'm able to spot this rush before it actually hits anything. And I would have been able to scout it way further back if this central highway here hadn't been located in a friggin' ditch. It's one of the more fun bits of Hell's Highway. In addition, I would be able to shoot at all these things as they mindlessly drive past our base, or Bravo, into our base. But again, there's the friggin' ditch, so I can't do anything. Anyway, I expect him to come and charge me at Bravo, because that's the smart thing to do, and he doesn't. But at this point, it is obvious that we are facing an all-in, that this is everything on the field. So I array my forces in front of Bravo because I'm expecting a charge on me. And I put infantry up here because that's going to be my fire break for this fight. And then I foolishly lose my Gazelle because, you know, if I have a fault in my gameplay, it's that I can never protect recon helicopters. And I think one of the ZZUs got an extremely lucky hit on it there. Anyway, back to neutral so we can see what's going on. So they're mindlessly rushing past me looking for Alpha. And we have my ally here who has spent all of his points on expensive shit, which is a bad idea. And it's about this point where I'm starting to tell him to, you know, get off the road, get into an open field, don't let them close in, and he doesn't do any of that. He just sits still. So this is sort of an exaggerated case of what you don't want to do, in that his force is extremely poorly suited to stop this in the first place. Well, it's not extremely poorly suited. It's because I do use heavy tanks later on to finally crush it, but you want to start running at this point. At this point, I would even say abandon this. You want to abandon the sector entirely, and when A1 Command tries to make it to Bravo, everything else flanks out left from Alpha. What you want to do in a rush is you want to prolong it as long as humanly possible. What you don't want to do is you don't want to let the enemy to get in close. Virtually every single rush in the game, whether NATO or PACT, requires closing in with the enemy. If he can't get close to you, he's not going to win the fight. So I call on some Babs and Heavy Hogs to try and slow this down and inflict some points. I know at this point that we're not going to win, just because there's too much here, even though it's in piecemeal. And you can see I'm telling him to run. He doesn't do it. But this isn't what you want to do, clearly. If you had this force, you'd run out here into an open plain where he'd have to run to catch you. And these tanks, the infantry, no, the BMPs wouldn't be able to do it. He could kite all of these forever if he wanted to. There's nothing in this horde of units that would be able to catch up with him, but he doesn't do it. And as a result, he gets slaughtered. So, one of the bigger mistakes a lot of people make in this game, and I'll just go over this while this fight goes on. You can see my hogs here are stunning an ungodly amount of units, which eventually rout in one of the most hilarious routes I've ever seen, because, you know, they're literally running away from nothing. But one of the bigger mistakes people have when they play this game is they don't understand that trading space for time against the rush is actually what you want to do. Rushes are the deadliest in the first, I'd say, 6-7 minutes that they're in. Once they make contact with your forces, the longer the rush proceeds, the weaker it's going to get. And that happens for a few reasons. The first is that actually you can't effectively control a force this large in small little groups. That's why you don't see me doing this crap. Because mindlessly rushing in one direction is pretty much dependent on you actually wiping out your opponent in your initial attack, because you have no strategic control over this. You can't do it. Not when you have, 50 tanks on the field. It's just not going to work. The second part is a lot of these rushes are extremely logistic intensive. Now, he captures fobs here because my ally, built 2 for some reason and then defended them poorly. So this is what you want to happen as the rusher, that you can steal your opponent's logistics. If those fobs hadn't been there, these T-62s would be at maybe 2/5 fuel. And you can already see that there are other units here. Yeah, see here, T-62s came down with everyone else. Actually, less than 2/5. It's more like 1/5. It can't go very far. That T-62, it can't physically drive to Bravo at this point. These 4s easy to use, out of fuel. These BMPs, which are much better, or much more fuel efficient, they're still capable of going a ways, but them by themselves aren't going to do much. They need this mass tank support. These T-55s are actually somewhat unique in that they have good fuel efficiency, but they're already, getting down to 2/3 of a tank. So that's one of the cardinal problems with rushes this big. You cannot resupply your force. You pretty much have to rely on your opponent to build logistics that you can steal and then resupply for you. And now my ally loses his command. Just to, put a cherry on top of it. So we're down, what, 800 points or so? Yeah. So it's not looking pretty for us. My allies pretty much been wiped off the map. He could have at least run the command away and we could start collecting from Bravo. Or not from Bravo, but Echo. But, whatever. So as I was saying, you want to survive the first 5 minutes. Because you'll see that initial rush was scary. That initial rush killed 2,395 points worth of units. But you'll notice as I begin my counterattack, that cost effectiveness starts going away. And so here we go with my counterattack. You see my martyrs, which are not exactly suited to this type of rush. With all these BMP-1s who can one-hit them, it's kind of annoying. And as you can see, the first wave of missiles kind of hurts. And I've got my weasels coming in here. Did I actually build all the martyrs I meant to? I'm not totally sure. Oh yeah, I lost like 3 earlier, stupidly. So weasels come in and do some damage, and my primary goal right now is to kill off all the BMP-1s I can, because they have anti-tank missiles. The reason I want to destroy them is this. The correct response to this type of rush, assuming that you can get rid of, mass anti-tank missile spam from these BMP-1s, is heavy tanks. And you'll see why very shortly. Weasels go in, do their thing, serve as a meat shield. They all die, lots of other stuff dies, but they take out the BMP-1s. Actually, it looks like the martyrs are taking on this last group. And you can see why autocannons and martyrs are not the best way to stop a rush like this. They actually perform very poorly against the T-55 because the T-55 is a superior defending unit against this type of thing. They're cheaper, they can penetrate the front armor, and they have a better fire rate. Which means that on defense, they are going to be better than a Martyr VTS-1. The biggest thing the Martyr VTS-1 has over it is its speed, 70 kilometers per hour against 50 kilometers per hour. That's important in offense because it lets you close with units that you cannot penetrate initially. This is why it's important. These T-55s, these T-62s, they can't break the Abrams armor. They can't break its front, they can't break its side, and they aren't fast enough to close in. And that means with proper micro, I can destroy everything in this picture. He tries to close in, I move back. I move back small distances each and every time because I do not want to expose my rear armor to the enemy. And then this happens. I don't know what the hell this is. This gets shot in one of the funnier moments of the battle. But this is the more interesting thing. They charge, I move back. They move back, I move forward. And I keep this up forever. I actually resupply here. And we're 14 minutes into the rush. We're still down, but notice how this rush, it isn't very scary anymore. All the logistics are gone. These guys are still starting to hurt for fuel. And this is not very scary. 3 Abrams, this is what heavy tanks are made for. And this is actually a bit of a mistake. I let them get too close. But again, because, you know, I'm what? 10 or 30 kilometers faster than these are, I can kite them. And they keep firing at my Varder BTS-1s, which they can penetrate, so I bug out with those, and I leave only my heavy tanks. And look at how close they are here. This is a tiny, tiny distance. It can't break the heavy armor. He doesn't even have the option to spread out in a line and try and get side armor hits because he's so slow. If he tries to go horizontal here, I can back up out of the range again. And my poor mutt bites it at this point, but all these tanks are in the open, so it doesn't matter. Even that volley of side armor hits, which was a mistake because, you know, retarded pathing through the house, that only did 2 points of damage. You can say, well, Bentguru, what about morale? That guy just got shot at a few times and he's panicked. And I say, well, yes, he got shot at because I exposed my side armor and they decided to shoot. The AI won't fire at shots they know it can't penetrate. Or the AI won't fire shots it knows won't penetrate. You can use the fire command, or the fire position command, but all you have to do to avoid that is to constantly move your vehicles. So, once again, he pushes, I kite, he retreats, I push back up. And I can do this forever. Because, 1, I'm killing tanks this way, and 2, he's using up even more fuel. As long as this fight goes on, I'm doing perfect. And I just keep this engagement going as long as possible. BMP-1 decides to join the fight there. That actually is a dangerous unit for me, and so I take it out. I call in some helicopter supplies to resupply the Abrams, who are running out of bullets. That's always the thing you want to see in your tanks, running out of bullets. And they all, in fact, have at least 1 level of veterancy already. Here we see a follow-up push from him. He's trying to replicate what he initially did, but this is the problem. You need a critical mass of units for this type of move fast command to work. Unless you have that critical mass, you can't punch through your opponent's lines and actually do damage. And I, meanwhile, have been prepping for this forever anyway. So he crests the hill and runs into a gigantic, massive infantry. While the Abrams come up from behind, and there is no more escape with the T-62s. And that is all she wrote. The game goes on for another 20 minutes, but we've essentially won. The score is tied, but PACT has no strategic mobility anymore. He can't use any of these units, because anything that comes out, as you see, is going to immediately get jumped by the Abrams and destroyed. His infantry are safe in the forests, but they can't leave. These T-62s, they don't have the fuel to go anywhere. And he cannot bring in anti-tank missiles because he's going to have to run the gauntlet through everything else first. And he doesn't have a resupply back here. So he is quite simply screwed. And this, again, is fairly typical of what you see of players who play like this. When the initial rush fails, they try and stick with what they know and call in more of it. So we see additional BMP-1 spam here. which again isn't horrible. The BMP-1 is actually not a bad unit. It does have an ATGM, not a great one, but it does have it. But you need... There are critical points, critical amounts of levels that you need of these units for them to work. 4 BMP-1s ain't going to cut it. And in fact, these singleton BMP-1s have troubles dealing with just the VABs I've set out here as pickets. This over here... Sorry, this over here is my ally. You don't have to watch him. And at this point, I decide to pull my Abrams back because I recognize that over here, these are not strategically important anymore. Yeah, that's a lot of points, but we're already ahead, and that's a huge amount of forces tied down for our opponent. So we can just safely ignore it and concentrate on the front. We say Abrams going up against BMP-1s. That one actually gets a side armor hit and does some damage. Helicopters come in, but I've got AA. And we can just speed through the rest of this game at speed 8. And watch as NATO slowly but surely turns the tables on our PACT player. I have no idea what my ally is doing up here. Like I said, he stopped responding to orders after initially disbanding his helicopter rush. This is me telling him where to go. He doesn't listen. So that is how pretty textbook example of how you want to deal with a sort of cheap all-ground PACT rush that involves cheap tanks. Now, if your opponent brings better anti-tanks like Conqueror's Jeeps or what is it, like the Sturm S, it can be harder to deal with because those anti-tank carriers will negate your heavy tanks. The trick is just to not commit heavy tanks unless they're in a situation where you know all the tank missiles have been disposed of. If I had known he had more tank missiles, or if I had known he had higher quality anti-tank missiles, I would have waited for him to rush Bravo, which he eventually would have been forced to do, and engaged him then. The key is not to let your opponent pick the battlefield that decides the match. He's almost always going to rush a particular position. If you can't hold that position, you run away and reposition elsewhere. The longer you draw it out, the better your chances are of winning. And you need to identify what unit is going to be best suited for whatever particular situation you're in. In this game, heavy tanks were a perfect counter because my opponent, while he did have anti-tank missile carriers, I was able to destroy them with Martyrs and Weasels, and they weren't very high quality ones anyway. So, that is lesson 1 on how to deal with mindless Zerg rushes in Wargame European Escalation. Lesson 2, I guess I can do a quick one on helicopters, will be coming along shortly. If you have any questions, please contribute to the thread. I'm sure there's going to be on Wargame European Escalation based on this video, mainly because I'll post it myself. Anyway, thank you for listening, and hopefully most of you have either learned something or gotten a little less insane.